The following program is being brought to you on the Voice America Business Channel. For more information about our network and to check our additional show hosts and topics of interest, please visit voiceamericabusiness.com. The Voice America Talk Radio Network is the worldwide leader in live Internet talk radio. Visit voiceamerica.com. The views and ideas expressed on the following program are strictly those of the host or guests and do not necessarily reflect the views and ideas held by the Voice America Talk Radio Network, its staff, and management.
Welcome to CIO Talk Radio with your host, Sanjo Gall. All comments, views, and opinions expressed on this show are strictly those of the host, guests, and callers. Here's Sanjo Gall.
Good morning and welcome to CIO Talk Radio. To learn more about the show, please visit www.ciotalkradio.com. Today's topic is IT and business transformation, helper or driver. Our guests for today's show are Russ Bostic, who is the EVP with Technology and Operations at Conseco. Good morning, Russ.
Good morning.
How are you, sir?
I'm fine, thanks.
Good. Are you enjoying the sunny weather in Chicago? Because I'm in Chicago as well.
I'm enjoying it, and of course I should take a photo of it because these will be scarce soon.
Yeah, they were talking about rain coming week. So, yeah, thank you so much again for participating. And we also have Paul Gossin, who is a business transformation expert and also is a great author of books. So, Paul, how's life?
Life is good. Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning, sir. So are we all ready to transform the world and the business?
That's the game.
Yes.
Yep.
Good. So, yeah, so basically business transformation, a lot of people use this word, and it has become more and more important lately because that seems to be the only key that's available for sustained profitability and growth for any organization as we see today. What truly is the primary trigger, or what would be the typical motivations that would prompt organization to seek business transformation? Because everybody wants to grow and want to have sustained profitability and growth, but not everybody starts that transformation at all times, or they just start at a given time. So what is that compelling need that suddenly comes up, Russ?
Well, the first thing that has to be considered is what is the business strategy? And often business transformation accompanies a desire to change markets, products, or distribution channels. So one of the things to keep in mind is that business transformation generally has to start with a business idea.
So when the strategy is there and a business idea is there, and that, of course, I hope with most mature organizations that's the case, or even the companies which are progressive, out of that, what is those set of triggers, if you will, that you will find which will make a company to say, you know what, now it's time for transforming our business versus going that incremental route?
Well, inside the company, there could be a change of leadership, and often that means that there's a fresh perspective. That change of leadership could be organic, or it could have been introduced by investors or the board. The point is that people take a different view of where the business ought to go. Outside the company, changes in economic conditions and markets can make a radical change in how you approach the business and what you need to do. In our industry segment, life, annuity, and supplemental health, many of the players were pursuing what are called mass affluent markets. I'm sure you've seen the ads with the Adirondack chairs and the beach oceans coming in, and they're buying life insurance or they're doing financial planning. Well, the events of the last 18 months have greatly diminished that as a market opportunity, and most of the players who are pursuing that have excess capacity. They're going to have to shift either to another market or accept that they're going to go through a cyclical downturn that could last for years in the attractiveness of that market. Well, that's going to lead to a business transformation, and that was brought from outside and not necessarily with some long-range forecast in mind. It's an event.
This is very interesting. So, Paul, do you see that people from outside are coming in are usually the messiahs of business transformation, or could that be prompted from within as well?
Well, I think it goes both ways. It certainly comes from within, and in fact, often coming from within is a more insightful route. What Russ is talking about, this sort of reactive change, where there's a set of external forces that are generating a necessary impetus to change. Unfortunately, that's the path to this business transformation process for most organizations. And while it does create more willingness to change or urgency, it often misses the the bigger opportunity, which is a more generative approach to change, where business leaders, specifically IT leaders, are more adapted to this accelerating rate of change that we all live in, and they're looking ahead in a generative way to see what the landscape looks like and leading change rather than reacting to it.
Now, how would you react to it, Russ, with respect to what Paul just mentioned? Because if you had somebody bringing this about from within, would that have been far more effective than somebody bringing from outside?
Well, you're talking about a person and individualizing it, and I think that the people are critical to business transformation, but I go back to what's the impetus for change, and a technologist has to be scanning the horizon constantly for what the opportunities are to use technology to achieve business transformation. In particular, if they can come up with an idea that applies something that has been proven in some point of practice, but not yet to their industry, they have an opportunity to make a transformational change that drives revenue, improves profitability, and ultimately sets the brand apart. That, again, comes in my model of thinking about it. It's something coming from the outside. But here, if a company positions itself as being adaptive, and IT senior leadership often are very adaptive, then they can take advantage of what they see, make it relevant to their business colleagues, and create an impetus for change. And that change could still be portrayed as an opportunity, which is the more positive way and generative way to look at it. I think that's what Paul is referring to. It can still be reactive, as in somebody's going to do this. Should we be doing it? And that's a different form of reactivity because it looks out a little bit on the horizon and tries to portray events that will happen as opposed to wait for them to happen. But in the end, I still think that business transformation has to be rooted in what's going on outside the company as a driver for what should happen inside the company. And it's the timeline that progressive companies are focused on. They're looking out into the future as to what they need to react to, respond to, and now proact rather than waiting for it to happen.
So, given the type of transformations that we see, should we expect that these business transformations should be those big bang, earth-shattering type of events, or should they be ongoing, continual type of events, or you can say incremental changes, because anyways, transformation was not overnight, ever. So, Paul, what do you think?
Well, this is a great point because IT managers and business leaders in the technology world are much more used to this idea of change. What's difficult now is what I call accelerating change, that the pace of change is actually accelerating. And for most of us, for most people in the business world, this is very difficult to grapple with. And I think in the IT world, people are much more used to this accelerating rate of change, and that creates a very distinctive opportunity for IT to have a very specific role to lead the process. And if there is a technology component, always, but there's also a process and people component. And I think it's a very important opportunity for IT managers to grapple with.
Now, Russ, in your case, of course, in this organization, so others that you may have worked in, what do you think has helped the most when the change crept in and it crept in, and then you were able to make people adjusted to the change slowly versus saying, here you go, now deal with it?
Well, the past 10 years I've worked in insurance companies, specifically life insurance. And since we're in a business where we're making long-term contract commitments, change tends to be more incremental rather than earth-shaking. Now, it's true that the Internet has changed how people think about, for instance, shopping for term life insurance, where it's a product that is relatively the same amongst the different participants, and people can spreadsheet them, quote-unquote, and even begin to get a sense, working with a qualified agent, as to what their underwriting appetite is and make sure that the risk, they almost place themselves into the right company. That wasn't the case 10 years ago, but is largely the case today. You can do that and do it successfully and in your own interest. So that's a transformation for that element of distribution of life insurance. Other segments of life insurance aren't changing at that rate, and it would be difficult to change them at that rate because most of the profitability comes from the in-force contracts and not from the new business. And I illustrate that as an example of an industry where incremental change probably makes the most sense. There are other industries, and I used to work for for a large technology provider for almost 15 years. In that industry, at the beginning of the year, when I was selling computer hardware, services, etc., they'd give me my quota, and I'd say, wow, how could I ever do that? They'd say, well, 40% of what you're selling we haven't announced yet. Well, that's a pace of change that the average business person in life insurance, it would boggle their mind, right? That's just not the pace of change in the insurance business. But technologists have been exposed to that pace of change, to support Paul's point, either in my case as a provider or, again, in my case as a consumer. You have to adapt to that change or you'll become obsolete within the industry, both professionally and actually personally. You won't find this an attractive place to work. You won't have interesting problems to work on. So we clearly are in the vanguard of most industries in thinking about how rapidly change could be effected. That's not going to apply to every industry. You do have to apply the desire to drive change to the problem at hand. And that's why I keep emphasizing look outside for guidance in order to then determine what the internal response or strategy ought to be.
Now, what you just mentioned brings up a very important point, is that since business transformation is so pervasive, it is, of course, impacting IT, but much more so the regular business, and besides the salespeople, everybody who's involved. So if the IT folks are sprinters by nature, and they can move change their speed at a heartbeat, but other people are fast walkers at best, there could be a weakest link issue, so the business transformation cannot be only done by IT people, and the people who are getting impacted are not working at that speed. So that mismatch could create even more problems.
I agree. My responsibilities include running most of the back office of Conseco Insurance. So I've got claims, policyholder service, agent care, and other functions besides IT. So I get to see both sides of that, and that can be a problem. And if IT is overdriving the business, you have two things that have to change in order for that to work. Either you've got to slow IT down because you can waste a lot of money imagining fancy technology systems that nobody ever uses. And you'll find business communities that say that's a really cute-looking paperweight, and an expensive one at that. But on the other hand, you could make demands of the business side to say, here's the opportunity. Your competitors are going to be doing this. If you don't inject the talent on the business side, they're able to keep up with this rate of change, your business is going to be marginalized over time. And for that matter, in the worst-case scenario, if the technology staff is particularly mobile, they might go to a competitor. Now, that doesn't happen as quickly as you might think in our industry, meaning the life annuity and supplemental health one. But there are plenty of industries where that example is well known, where IT staff who have really transformational ideas and an ability to execute their dreams move on to somewhere else when the business isn't receptive to implementing their ideas.
Now, Paul, this is very, this is quite a discussion around the different speed at which business and IT is used to moving, and you want business transformation happen across the board, so you want different people to be coming at the same pace, if possible, and then make this happen and make it successful. So what are your thoughts? But before we get you to share your wisdom on this, please stay tuned. We'll be right back, listeners, and we'll discuss this more.
Up-to-date business and financial news. Call now and get the financial information you need. 866-472-5790. 866-472-5790.
The experts are here.
Voice America Business Network.
Looking for flexible ways to scale your IT efforts? Then visit www.avol.com today. Avol helps companies find the global IT talent they need to align their IT and business objectives. Whether it's hiring top IT leadership talent or building a reliable technology team, Avol delivers. To find out how Avol can help your company, visit www.avol.com or call 1-800-947-2832. Avol, delivering global IT talent. That's www.avol, A-V-V-A-L, avol.com. Visit today.
Hello, this is Red Hat. The vast majority of cloud computing solutions being built today are using open source technologies. In fact, industry analysts tell us that 80% of early clouds are using open source as the key infrastructure. Most of these are being built by Red Hat customers. The benefit for end customers in the entire industry is a new level of openness and interoperability that only open source enables. We at Red Hat, along with our customers and the open source community, are proud to be leading the charge to this new model of computing.
When it comes to business, you'll find the experts here. Voice America Business Network.
You are listening to CIO Talk Radio. To learn more about the show, please visit www.ciotalkradio.com. If you have a question or comment, call toll-free 1-866-472-5790. Now back to the show. Here's Sanjog Gal.
Welcome back. So, Paul, you got sprinters, you got marathon runners, you got fast walkers, and people who just like to leisurely walk in the whole gamut in terms of in a given business. How on earth can you get business transformation going?
Well, this is a great question, but you did forget one category, which is individuals or departments that actively resist change. And I think we have to keep this in mind. The strategic component of a business transformation or organizational change initiative is critically important, but the next phase, and this is what Russ was really speaking to, is this process of alignment where we're asking the questions, the tough questions that most people avoid, and we're beginning to build the business case, beginning to align the teams around the business case, and starting to the process of communicating, messaging the need and the urgency for this change process. And if we don't, and if you ask the question, why do large organizational initiatives fail? And trust me, they do fail. It usually comes down to a breakdown in this process of alignment, and then later on, when we're missing the level of adoption that we'd like to see, you can trace it back to that we really didn't do the work in aligning the organization to this new reality.
So when we are talking about different types of people that we end up dealing with, and we are trying to have them do this business transformation, which in turn is connected to alignment. And alignment has been discussed to depth. So where are we going wrong, because of which many times business transformation projects and or initiatives don't see the daylight, and or if they see it for a time being, and then they fail miserably. Russ, what have you seen happen because of which we see these inevitable fate for many of these initiatives?
Well, I think we need to make a distinction between what someone might sell at the board level as, say, a $5 to $10 million investment that requires some senior approval and for which there are going to be definitive statements of benefits, and the small projects that need to be done in order to realize the full benefit. There's a tendency to become enamored with the home run on a transformation project, to back-end load the savings and to say, when this system's in place, we'll then save all this stuff. The problem with that is that not only are you drawing some of the key experts into that project, so whatever incremental change was happening suddenly ceases, but everyone pins their hopes on the successful implementation of a system to achieve a business transformation goal and ignore the fact that people need to execute transformation. The way to have a successful project is to set up small pilots that take you through the entire transformation process on an element of what it is you hope to achieve eventually, and to get the teams of business and IT staff to norm and storm themselves into an effective working group. And in the process of doing that, you're going to find out that some of the people don't play well. You may have IT people who are really bent on proving that they can become an expert in, say, computer telephony integration, and they're creating a resume item, if nothing else, if they don't stay with the company. And you may have business people whose whole goal is to pave the cow path, to use one of, I think, Michael Hammer's phrases, to try to keep things the same but automate them in a new skin. Somewhere between that, you have to have real transformation, achieve real goals with partners on the business and IT side who understand each other in that regard. And forming those teams at the beginning as a small set of the larger project is critical, and frankly also establishes a stage gate where if the pilot fails, you have to ask yourself, okay, do we do another pilot, changing some of the players in the problem, or was this just a bad idea and I'm going to cut my losses right now?
Do you think the senior management would be that naive or gullible that they would fall for this $7 million project where all savings and all the benefits and profitability will be at the tail end?
I think that there are many, many executives who are very smart, but I also point to what's happened to the economy over the last year, and we tend to get enamored of the dials sometimes. and lose the context that created the numbers and how much risk is actually inherent in the program.
So, Paul, what have you seen out there? Do you see this is the type of dog and pony show game that goes on, and in the name of business transformation?
Well, unfortunately, I have to agree with Russ on this, and the element of risk is a very large piece of it. I mean, let's face it. On one hand, people and organizations, by their nature, resist change, but then we also have to say that change is essential. So then the question is, how can we manage risk? Or how can we at least begin to quantify risk? And again, most often we tend to fall in love with projects, and we lose our objectivity in that process. And I have to agree that senior management is as guilty of this as any other level of in an organization. And so the question is how can you build an objective criteria and manage a conversation so that you can compare and contrast scenarios so that you can start to get that objective perspective that will let you make decisions in the most informed way.
So if you were to come back and say that the different people who are involved in making a business transformation happen, I mean, of course, it is a pervasive change, but then somebody has to lead it. So would you find people who are, people person, or they're the type of people who take care of individual needs, etc., or they're taskmasters, or you'd find a bunch of go-getters who would, go over people's dead body to make this transformation happen? What exactly in reality works when it comes down to making a successful business transformation? What type of people, what type of animals do we need? Russ?
Well, first of all, let me just comment on the latter, which is the go-getters who slash their way through the jungle, right? That's only appropriate if the business is really at risk, its fundamental premise is at risk. Then you're willing to deal with the collateral damage, and for that matter, you'll accept the risk of failure, because to do nothing would be to fail as well. And so I'm not a big fan of the SWAT team that comes in and does that, and for the very simple reason that they won't be there to operate it. And a lot of the transformed environment needs to be optimized, and new learning has to occur after it's already in production. And if all the learning is owned by a set of swashbuckling re-engineering experts, there's not going to be, they're going to go on to the next swashbuckling re-engineering thing, because that's what excites them. That's what they're very good at. They're very good at rapid problem analysis and mustering people, and frankly not necessarily at negotiating, but running over, right? But running a normal business involves daily influence and negotiation. It involves constantly looking at the problem and figuring out how to optimize it once you've gotten to that new state, that new level of performance that the transformation implies. And I just think it's dangerous to think that you can rapidly switch from one model to the other with a hard break. In truth, you need some of that personality. Every business transformation team needs that person who says, I just don't get it. I don't think we should be doing it that way. Here's what you could do, to create tension in the group. But there also should be, within that same group, people whose ordinary life is hitting their numbers, optimizing it, driving incremental improvements, and responding to the failure of the system. And many systems, old systems, we all know how they fail. New systems, we get to find out how they fail in the public. And you need to have people that know how to respond and fix things. And that's not necessarily, that reactive response is not necessarily the same kind of personality that drives an end-to-end transformation. That's my experience, at least. So I would stick more with a team of people that includes all the elements that you suggest, to the degree that the project is large enough and you can afford it.
Paul, what have you seen in the world out there?
Well, I think you said that IT people are sprinters, and in many ways, I think that's a deficit. If we're talking about an organizational transformation, it really is a marathon mindset. And in a marathon, you often slow down at the beginning because you have to set the pace correctly. And I think what we're headed to here is more of a state where change is a normal business process, as opposed to an exceptional thing that happens in exceptional circumstances. Because exceptional circumstances are the new normal. And so when you get into a team, I think I really agree with Russ on the whole concept of a pilot or an early stage process. And that can be a sprint, certainly, where you're sprinting not for a complete organizational shift, but you're sprinting for a test case where you can build the metrics, build the leading indicators, understand the landscape, and build that internal expertise. And I do really see this is a homegrown opportunity. Building that team of people who are adapted to managing change processes internally ultimately is what every business has to do. And it moves us away from the danger of overcorrecting or overcompensating, where we've got the big swings in steering going one way and another way versus the very steady pace headed toward a longer-term objective. Now, business is always going to change. Volatility is the new normal, so there's going to be corrections, there's going to be course corrections, but it's setting that focus so that we're not overcompensating, overcorrecting.
Now, would you say there's something like a transformation fatigue that might set in if a company decides to say, you know what, I want to keep changing? Yes, as a business, we are there to make money, we are there to grow, but then could you have a moving target? I mean, for how long anybody could handle a moving target while going about doing what they're supposed to do? Paul?
Well, I think what we're talking about here is a strong foundation. I mean, Sun Tzu, The Art of War, first build a strong foundation. And as an IT manager, you have to set a strong foundation. And one of the great ways you can sabotage yourself is by having too many initiatives going at one time. And I see this so often in organizations. Somebody presses the 911 emergency button, someone in senior leadership, and so the team goes into a highly reactive state where suddenly they're changing course, they're shifting priorities, they're implementing new systems, and they're not paying enough attention to the follow-through, the details, and the ongoing management through time of those systems. And so then they create a nightmare of follow-up issues from the last system, but senior management has already gone on to the next new life-saving initiative that's going to save the company or move us in the right direction. And so we never get to clean up and follow through and handle the details of our last organizational initiative. So in some ways, I really see it's slowing down the little movements and focusing on a bigger movement and building that case slowly so that it becomes more of a standardized process as opposed to a reactive busyness.
Let's take a quick break, listeners. We'll be right back after these messages and see if IT has earned the medals or the stripes, if you will, which would allow them to be in the forefront of a business transformation. Are they ready yet? Is the IT leadership and also the crew ready to actually help, in fact, steer the whole transformation, including envisioning and planning and actually leading, and let the business follow? Are we there yet? And what is, if not, then what is left to be desired before this honor can be achieved and we are allowed to do this business transformation? So please stay tuned. We'll be right back and discuss.
Whether the market's up or down, or if you're looking to improve your portfolio, our experts are ready to talk to you. Call now toll free 866-472-5790. That's 866-472-5790. Voice America Business Network. Whether the market's up or down, or if you're looking to improve your portfolio, our experts are ready to talk to you. Call now toll free 866-472-5790. That's 866-472-5790. Voice America Business Network.
Looking for flexible ways to scale your IT efforts? Then visit www.avol.com today. Avol helps companies find the global IT talent they need to align their IT and business objectives. Whether it's hiring top IT leadership talent or building a reliable technology team, Avol delivers. To find out how Avol can help your company, visit www.avol.com or call 1-800-947-2832. Avol, delivering global IT talent. That's www.avol.com. Visit today.
Hello, this is Red Hat. The vast majority of cloud computing solutions being built today are using open source technologies. In fact, industry analysts tell us that 80% of early clouds are using open source as the key infrastructure. Most of these are being built by Red Hat customers. The benefit for end customers in the entire industry is a new level of openness and interoperability that only open source enables. We at Red Hat, along with our customers in the open source community, are proud to be leading the charge to this new model of computing.
Do you need directions to solid financial future? If so, the Money Answers Show with Jordan Goodman will provide you with a roadmap to making smart money decisions in every area of your personal finances. Join Jordan every Monday at 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 3 p.m. Eastern for the Money Answers Show on the Voice America Business Channel. Learn how and where to get the best deals on mortgages, cars, and insurance. Find out the best ways to save for college and retirement. Get out of debt, improve your credit rating, and save on your taxes. The Money Answers Show with Jordan Goodman will provide you with great tips on investment opportunities in real estate, stocks, annuities, and other investment vehicles. That's the Money Answers Show with Jordan Goodman on the Voice America Business Channel every Monday at 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time.
From the boardroom to you, Voice America Business Network.
You are listening to CIO Talk Radio. To learn more about the show, please visit www.ciotalkradio.com. If you have a question or comment, call toll-free 1-866-472-5790. Now back to the show. Here's Sanjog Gall.
Welcome back. So we were to talk about the question where IT has it earned the stripes to be able to lead business transformation. But Russ, I guess you could definitely share more things with respect to what Paul just finished up on.
Well, a couple of things. One is that the sort of, going back to the analogy of having a team that's really strong and takes no prisoners, I think that works in the venture capital world where software companies are startups, but there's an expectation there that, 18 out of 20 of the organizations ultimately fail. And so that failure rate is well known and accepted. In a normal business, that failure rate would never be accepted. And, in fact, it would injure the business in a mature business that's trying to transform itself. So we do need to have people with a balanced, holistic view of what they're trying to accomplish. And we need to avoid what I call arsonist firemen who innocently set fires and then are given hero buttons for putting out the fires they started. That's not a good model for an IT project or, for that matter, a business transformation. Now, in aligning to the business and creating more success, I think it's really important that business people learn something about technology, and there's ways to go about that. You can do it through reading. Frankly, the best ones are simply curious, and they find smart technologists, and they make sure they plant themselves in front of that person, whether it's in a meeting to review a project or at coffee, and they ask them lots of questions. And then, they go to seminars and the like, and they make themselves smart about technology so that they can understand the opportunities and the risks. By the same token, senior IT leaders, or for that matter, senior individual contributors, need to have peripheral vision about what's going on in the business. They need to be a student of business. And there's a lot of ways to accomplish that. You can get an MBA. You can go to seminars again. You can read a lot of books. You can listen to CIO Talk Radio. But somehow you've got to make sure that you're speaking the same language as the people that you're trying to work with on a transformation. And I accomplish that in my team. My head of operations is a lawyer. My head of technology is an MBA who started a company and sold it to IBM. I have another head of health systems who's a CPA by training and an MBA and teaches MBA school. I've got a number of people that work for me as well as my own background who can relate to business professionals in the same language. Now, does that mean that we walk in their shoes? No. I've learned what it's like to walk in the shoes of insurance operations by now managing it, and I'm learning a lot every day. the point is that the technologists and the business people, if they want to execute a transformation, have to be worried about more than just how their function's going to execute or look on the project. They have to take accountability for the other functions as well, and accountability for communication and understanding that's above and beyond just optimizing the business.
Now, Paul, like we see, Russ is one of those leaders the company is blessed to have because he's proactively hired people who actually bring some outside, you can say, discipline knowledge so that they are a little more open to looking at business as a business versus through the IT eyes. How can that be brought into an organization where the hiring to some extent has already happened and you don't have the luxury of a cleanup, if you will, and start afresh?
Well, there's this wonderful process where organizations get fractured into camps. And, Russ was speaking about the business language, the IT language, and ultimately it's a cultural issue. So we do have to go through a process of aligning those two different cultures and setting the ultimate culture of the company that includes an IT culture and a business culture. The question you asked was, should CIOs have a seat at the table? And clearly the answer is yes. In fact, in so many ways, the entire industry is trending that way. Inside of that, a CIO's job is to align their team, or at least buffer their team from the business culture so that their team can operate effectively. But you mentioned one of my favorite words, which is accountability. And so when it comes to earning that place at the table, it isn't just about, rolling out an implementation plan. It's about owning a segment of the business and owning a set of results and ultimately owning a set of promises or outcomes for the entire organization. So when we get into the project implementation phase, again, this is where some of the big risks are, and generating those structures of accountability is really where the rubber meets the road. People talk about execution as the holy grail, but when we get the question is actually what is execution? What does it actually take to drill down and follow that project through over time? And ultimately, it's setting up those structures so that we can manage a project through time in that incremental way. Russ?
Yes, I agree with that perspective. That is the way that I would approach it. As I said earlier, I think that you said earlier that building a foundation is important, and I think on a foundation you also have to think to a degree about incrementalism. Now, people don't like the word incrementalism. It sounds bad. And then you say something like optimizing, and they go, okay, that's good. But it's really the same thing. What we're doing is taking increments of change and creating a process where change is continuous and inevitable. And the fact of the matter is, and if you go back to the beginning of our conversation where I said outside, it's dynamic and changing all the time. So why would you expect that inside the company is static too? The company is not going to be responsive to challenges or to opportunities if it isn't in a framework and a mindset that is continuously adapting. And it shouldn't be exhausting. It should be exhilarating if it's managed correctly.
Now, besides having seat at the table and bringing that IT know-how, how can essentially IT contribute as a discipline in the success of a business transformation? It could be starting from the planning phase to execution, monitoring, rolling out, and keeping track of what is going on. Things are not slipping through the cracks. So it's pervasive in the overall execution of a business, but could it also be pervasive and or touch every portion of the business transformation and actually add value by its very existence? So, Russ, do you see, is there a way to kind of itemize those specific benefits that IT could bring about?
Well, the first one is frequently IT has a better picture of how the business processes work in reality because of the way they're automated and the way the data flows and the way controls are managed in reality than some of the business staff that are monitoring the performance of a process. And that comes about in particular when there are situations where the business hasn't changed its basic structure for a long time, because that then just attracts people that operate rather than people that inspect, analyze, take apart, and understand. And so one of the very first places that IT should take leadership is saying, hey, here's how it works today. So the as-is state isn't just these screens that somebody's manipulating, but rather here's how the data flows, here's how a transaction is executed. Is it posted at night? Is it done real time? Is there an opportunity to change that? We ought to be conveying that level of essentially what we would think of as IT architecture, but ultimately reflects the business architecture and the business process model. And we ought to be very involved in that. Now, that's one of the toughest things to train IT people to do, because going back to what I said before, the only way they can be effective at conveying a data model is not to describe it as a star schema and go into all this, whether it's how it's structured, but rather to say in business terms, here's how this data impacts your process. And that requires people to have a business understanding. And those skills are scarce, and they're not going to be delivered from offshore.
What are the typical pet peeves you see, Paul, from a business from a business side, where they say, you know what, IT does great things, but there are these 5 things which we simply don't understand or don't like with respect to the way they communicate? And Russ did mention about that Greek and Latin, if you will, when it comes down to talking or communicating what the results are or what's going on. What is that you see from an outside, and what is to be changed on the IT side, and how an IT leader can go about doing that?
Well, this is a great question, because, what Russ was talking about is the process-driven change, which traditionally has been where IT has been very strong, coming into organizations, building from within in organizations to develop streamlined processes, is one of the major quadrants of business transformation. And so, unfortunately, a lot of the low-hanging fruit has already been picked for many organizations in this area. Now, of course, with the accelerating rate of change, there's always more low-hanging fruit emerging. But I think for IT to really have a seat at the table, the opportunity is to step outside of that, just that one process accountability, and also start to look at the business from a larger perspective. Organizational change, business transformation can be very customer-focused, or can also be very product-focused. The ultimate is a shift in the business model, although that again, is more dangerous for a large organization, especially if it happens too quickly. So taking that bigger perspective is critical, and I think that IT leaders really can step up to that opportunity. I mean, it takes place in a conversation, a series of conversations, and the most critical element of that process is being able to see the current state, to really be able to understand where the organization is at now, and start to build that desired state so that you can create a model of what that new organization could look like, and be able to see that model, pick it apart, look at all the elements. And I think those are skills that many IT leaders are already relatively used to in terms of what they've had to do in order to implement existing projects in the past.
Now, it is also said that, while change is inevitable, but then it has also been unpredictable for the people who may be down the chain of command, who may not be as aware. Is that by design, or is it something, is a mistake from the leadership top down, that they are not telling that transformation is about to happen, so buckle up? Russ?
I think that if big transformation is happening, the leaders have to regularly state it, because if you don't do that, then those small pilot programs that I mentioned, which are really the sort of gold-plated way to test out an idea and to establish an early win that then you can then celebrate. If you don't do that, people won't be attracted to taking those career risks. They'll say, it's a pilot project, they always get killed, and then everybody doesn't have a position for me going back into the optimization stuff because they hired somebody else to do the optimizing while I was working on this. There needs to be a fundamental commitment. It needs to be foundational that business transformation is an ongoing and regular activity. Now, the real issue is every business has a large portfolio of capabilities of different ages and different levels of relevance to the current strategy. You can't change everything at once. So how do you take a common mentality, having a good method for business process reengineering, for instance, and a good method for scanning the outside environment and grabbing best practices or seeing opportunities to do something completely different than what our competitors are doing? How do you take that and make that part of the organic fabric of the company, and then each year transform an element of the company's approach. Always looking for reuse, always looking for building a foundation of capabilities, not just a particular project or process. You're trying to create in the organization the ability to respond continuously, and that's what's important. And that means you have to have a portfolio view of what has to be done. So the leaders not only have to create an environment where change is viewed as inevitable, but also highlight every year, and this is where we're going to achieve it today, and here's how it relates to the changes that we did last year, the year before, and we might do next year, in the year to come. That type of thing is absolutely a leadership accountability. And it's hard to execute because, keep in mind, over the last 12 months in particular, most business strategies have been turned on their heads for most companies, and we read about that in the paper. So there's a definite shortening of the horizon that's gone on, and particularly those that aren't well capitalized or funded are very short horizons, while the patient capital, the people that have a lot of surplus, are more focused on seeing a lot of equity. Where can I buy assets on the cheap? Where can I invade markets on the cheap? And you'll see as we come out of the recession a great deal of activity in that regard. But right now, people are laying low and watching for the opportunities and trying to buy into opportunities cheaply, whether it's through transformation or acquisition. That'll change. So the portfolio method that I emphasize is kind of going through a weird bend in the curve, and it's not as seamless as it ought to be because of the dynamic changes going on in the markets, in our capital markets, that is.
Let's take a quick break, listeners. We'll be right back after these messages. And, Paul, let's listen to you about how warm-up exercise could be performed on the people, whether IT or non-IT, when a business transformation is impending. And how do you make sure that the people who are going to be at the receiving end or the people who are going to be driving, they are almost synced up so that the speed at which the transformation is brought about on someone does not disrupt what they do business as usual, but still are able to make incremental positive change. Please stay tuned. We'll be right back and discuss.
Whether the market's up or down, or if you're looking to improve your portfolio, our experts are ready to talk to you. Call now toll-free, 866-472-5790. That's 866-472-5790. Voice America Business Network.
Looking for flexible ways to scale your IT efforts? Then visit www.avol.com today. Avol helps companies find the global IT talent they need to align their IT and business objectives. Whether it's hiring top IT leadership talent or building a reliable technology team, Avol delivers. To find out how Avol can help your company, visit www.avol.com or call 1-800-947-2832. Avol, delivering global IT talent. That's www.avol, A-V-V-A-L, avol.com. Visit today.
Hello, this is Red Hat. The vast majority of cloud computing solutions being built today are using open source technologies. In fact, industry analysts tell us that 80% of early clouds are using open source as the key infrastructure. Most of these are being built by Red Hat customers. The benefit for end customers in the entire industry is a new level of openness and interoperability that only open source enables. We at Red Hat, along with our customers in the open source community, are proud to be leading the charge to this new model of computing.
When it comes to business, you'll find the experts here. Voice America Business Network.
You are listening to CIO Talk Radio. To learn more about the show, please visit www.ciotalkradio.com. If you have a question or comment, call toll-free 1-866-472-5790. Now back to the show. Here's Sanjog Gall.
Welcome back. So, Paul, what do you think about warming up the business and its crew for them to be able to get most out of this and not be disrupting their typical workday?
Well, this is a great question. And, most often when an organization is under stress, people tend to isolate themselves. This is unfortunate, but most often senior leadership will close their doors and ask this question, which is, what are we going to do? How are we going to come up with the right strategy? And because the organization is under stress, the leadership tends to isolate itself, and you move in the direction of a disconnect between senior management and other levels of management, versus going through a process where you engage your team in those big questions. And it is question-driven. You know, a lot of the work we do at Business Transformed is shifting people toward questions, because when you ask those big organizational questions and you really send those questions out to your team, or as Russ said, you know, build your roadmap, stick to your roadmap, and then with each element of the roadmap, message that as a question or a series of questions, people tend to engage and take ownership or more ownership in that process. So in a lot of ways, it's about opening those doors to engage that team intelligence and taking people through a process where you're asking the questions. You know, it moves away from coming up with the right strategy, which is AKA a single strategy that will save us or help us get to that next level, to understanding the landscape, so that you can build that criteria, so that when you do focus in on that decision, you've got a broad perspective. And really, that's a team intelligence process. And so building that team, engaging the team, asking those questions is really the key to that broad perspective.
If you go about asking questions, and then if it opens up a can of worms, and then there's some need for consensus building, so then you would say bye-bye to business transformation too.
Well, I think that is business transformation. If there's a can of worms that needs to be addressed, and the organization has got to stop and address it, or make a decision not to address it, either one is fine. But if that's what needs to be done, then that's what we need to do in order to move the organization forward. And it's all moving in the direction of business transformation. Now the question is, are we moving there in the most direct path, or are we taking a very long, circuitous route with many, many course corrections? And I think when you start to engage the team intelligence, and again, we're never going to have consensus, but working toward that more open process where people can see the direction that the organization is heading in and be engaged in the process, you do tend to have a much more buy-in, much more alignment, and a much better shot at getting those rates of adoption that you want to see as the process goes forward.
Based on what Paul said, Russ, this is a question for you. Would you think a loosely coupled business transformation initiative where, as needed, we stop, look around, be a sailor, and see everything is okay, and then go about completing this transformation is what is going to make us successful, or would that be a speedboater approach that where we would have something, a very tight goals, set of goals, initiatives, and just zoom towards that goal? Is that what's going to get you the business transformation?
Well, I think central to that is how well is the problem understood? Because if you know where you want to get, because it's been proven, for instance, in another competitor or someone who's brought in says, I've done this in a different industry, if you know what the end state vision is very tightly, then I do think that it's feasible and desirable to have a very tight schedule and hold people to account for specific activities. But Paul described something that sounds fuzzy and squishy, and I totally get it because that's the world I live in. A lot of what we do has to drive on principles. It has to think about what are the company's capabilities and how can we set up a series of steps that create learning as we go so that we can do course corrections and still achieve the end state vision. Now, that course correction might be, this is going to take 2 months longer, but it'll have these 3 elements that we now know are valuable, and that it would be a mistake to do it 60 days faster and then have those elements come in 6 months later because of the way the business could absorb the change only in one chunk. It couldn't have 2 chunks 60 days apart, right? It has to have them 6 months apart for reasons of training, customer communication, whatever, right? So those questions, really depend on just how specific the end state goal is and what your capability is to achieve it. I'm more familiar with the method of I've been more successful. Let me rephrase that. I've been more successful with the method of having a vision, having a generally bounded budget and time frame for doing it, with an estimate of plus or minus 10 to 20% of the resources required, and then setting up some carefully constructed early stages of the program that allow us to prove those estimates, to understand whether the team's capable of achieving the vision, and also to see whether the vision is still timely. Keep in mind that while you're making this change, everything around the company is changing. It's changing all the time. And therefore, having a really specific 3-year program, in my mind, is almost an oxymoron. It's doomed to failure. The idea of 3 years and being specific just doesn't work right now in many industries.
On behalf of the show and our listeners, I'd really like to thank you, Russ and Paul, for sharing your thoughts about IT, how IT can actually help transform a business or at least play an important role, and it could be a driver in some cases and make it successful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much again. Now, if you have any questions and if you would like to share your story related to business transformation that's happening in your company with IT getting involved at whatever level, please send us your views and your thoughts to views@ciotalkradio.com. That is views@ciotalkradio.com. Thank you again for listening to CIO Talk Radio. This is Sanjog Aul, your talk show host. Till next week, take care and God bless.
Thank you for tuning in to CIO Talk Radio. To learn more about the show, please visit www.ciotalkradio.com. Join Sanjog Aul next Wednesday at 9 a.m. Central, 7 a.m. Pacific for another hour of CIO Talk Radio.